Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Lizzie Sagu, President-elect of the British Society of Soil Science, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to our sixth webinar of the year. Before I welcome our presenters, I just want to introduce the British Society of Soil Science as hosts of today's webinar. So we're an established international membership organisation and charity committed to the study of soil in its widest aspects. We bring together those working within academia and have a growing membership amongst practitioners implementing soil science in industry and those with a keen interest in soils. So we plan to host 10 webinars this year, so please keep an eye out on our website for further details of what's to come. And before we begin with our speakers, just some basic housekeeping. So all your microphones have been muted. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentations, and we'll be keeping a track of those during the webinar. So if you have got questions for our speakers, please submit them in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to take as many as possible at the end of the talks. So today's presentation has also been awarded BASIS and Neuroso CPD points. So if you're registered with either body, please contact us directly after the event and we can apply your points. Finally, please be aware that we're recording today's presentation. So the webinar today has been organised in partnership with the Society's corporate member, Walt, and we're delighted to have a speaker from their organisation here today. So I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Utibe Utin, who will be speaking on dynamic soil structure, improving predictions of soil water contents in agroecosystems. Dr. Utibe Utin is a soil physicist and a lecturer in the Department of Soil Science and Land Resource Management at the University of Uyo, Nigeria. He recently completed his PhD in soil science at the University of Aberdeen, where his research focused on the interactions between soil structure, soil water retention, compaction resilience, and soil carbon dynamics. His work has advanced the understanding of dynamic soil structure through the development of a novel framework for inferring changes in soil water retention from simple soil structure measurements. So over to you, Utibe.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with you to share my research on how the soil structure changes and how that can be harnessed to improve the prediction of soil water content in agroecosystems. So soil structure evolves rapidly within an agricultural season. At the start of the season, tillage is carried out with the idea of creating a favorable environment for crops to thrive. But this activity disrupts the stable soil structure left in the previous season and creates an unstable seed bed, which is highly macroporous. So early in the season, when water has been applied to the soil, the capillary forces cause the soil particles to pull themselves together. The aggregates coalesce. This in the macro scale causes a significant slumping of the seed bed. And by this stage, most of the macropores have crumbled. Though in the mid-season, there is a significant redevelopment of the soil structure. So there's a significant redevelopment of the soil structure through biological actions, talking about the actions of root hairs binding microaggregates into macroaggregates, the input of soil organic carbon, and the tunneling of earthworms, and the tunneling of roots. These tunnelings create preferential pathways for water to flow deep into the soil. So late in the season, soil structure is well developed already, and at maturity, pre-harvest, and extending to post-harvest, soil structure may remain stable or begin to degrade as the vegetative cover declines or are being removed. Whether they remain stable or they degrade is dependent on the amount of soil organic carbon and depend on soil structure, soil texture, as well as the weather. So you can see that the soil structure at different time points within an agricultural season is different. And this also affects how water is stored and it's released within the soil. Now let us look at soil water retention curve. There's a question there, is it a static condition or a dynamic property? Soil water retention curve is a curve that expresses the relationship between water content and matrix potential. Matrix potential is the force that holds water in the soil. So soil water retention curve has been seen to be a fingerprint of soil structural condition. This is so because if you are presented with two soil water retention curves, you can tell the one that is from a compacted soil and the one that is from a soil with good pore size distribution. So the soil water retention curve holds important information that are very important in agriculture, including irrigation management. For example, we have the saturated water content, which is the water content at which all pore spaces are filled with water. And we have the field capacity, which is the matrix potential at which after heavy irrigation or heavy rainfall, all the macro pores have been drained by gravity. We have the permanent wilting point, which is the matrix potential at which water exists as thin films on the surfaces of soil particles. So the domain between field capacity and permanent wilting point is the domain of plant available water. So let's go back to the question, is it a static condition or a dynamic property? Making decision based on one set of hydraulic properties across a whole season for years gives the impression that the soil structure is static. But as we've seen in the previous slide, the soil structure is dynamic. And since the soil structure is dynamic, the soil water retention curve, which is affected by soil structure, is also dynamic. That means early in the season, at maturity, at even after harvest, there are different soil structures, and also this affects the soil water retention curve. There are limitations of the existing methods of measuring soil water retention curve. To measure soil water retention curve, you have to collect the core samples, soil samples using core samplers, then saturate them. After saturating them, you pass them through different equipment to obtain the equilibrated weights of the soil samples and at different matrix potentials. Then you still need the oven dry weights to obtain the gravimetric water content. After that, you can obtain the volumetric water content by multiplying it with bulk density. So the equipment used in equilibrating the soil samples at different different matrix potentials, sandbox, tension table, pressure plates, apparatus. These equipments offer excellent accuracy, but they're very expensive. Working with them is labor intensive and can require several months to measure full range soil water retention curve. We also have the sensors. Sensors offer continuous temporal monitoring of soil water content in situ. However, they may interfere with field operations and provide measurement with limited spatial representativeness. This is so because in some cases it is not possible to install so many sensors in a field. So the limited number of sensors installed may not be able to capture the field variabilities. Well, this is not my area shortly. Vincent will come up and do justice to it. So let us look at the modeling of soil water retention curves. Modeling is actually carried out to bring out the full, to characterize the measured soil water retention curve. The soil water retention curve as measured do not have the full information on how water is released or how water is retained in the soil. So you need a model to describe that. On the right, you have an example of a model fitted to the soil water retention curve. So to fit a model, a full range soil water retention curve measured is needed. However, the measurement of full range soil water retention curve each time the soil structure changes is impossible. This is why I may say that the assumption, the static assumption, assuming that the soil structure is static, is a necessary one. So here we have the Ursuline model. We have so many types of model, the most popular ones being the Van Genuten model. We have the Brooks and Corey model, but here we are presenting Ursuline model, equally popular. And we are presenting Ursuline model because in the next slide, we are going to look at it as a reference model in a new framework. So this slide presents a new framework that was developed by me and my supervisors during my PhD at the University of Aberdeen. So this framework tries to infer the soil water retention curve of one condition from that of a known condition. So the framework has the reference condition and the inference condition. So at the reference condition, we have the full range soil water retention curve measured and Ursuline model fitted to it. Then we have the parameters of Ursuline model. We have the saturated water contents. We have the shape parameters of Ursuline model being the scaling parameter G and the exponential parameter mu. We also have the residual water content. At the reference condition also, we have simple structural properties of the soil, bulk density, macroporosity, and microporosity. Microporosity is obtained as the difference between saturated water content and macroporosity. At the inference condition, the model only requires measurement of simple soil structural properties, which are saturated water content, bulk density, and macroporosity. Then we obtain microporosity as the difference between saturated water content and macroporosity. So the new model uses the measured soil water retention curve of the reference of the inference condition. And the parameters inferred by the Utibe Utin procedure include the residual water content, which is obtained by scaling the reference residual water content using relative bulk density. The scaling parameter of Ursuline model G, which is obtained by scaling the reference scaling parameter using relative microporosity. And the exponential parameter of Ursuline model mu, which is scaled from the reference parameter using relative macroporosity. After obtaining these inference parameters or parameters at the inference condition, we now feed the parameters into the reference Ursuline model to obtain soil water content at different metric potentials. So this model can be applied in time and in space, forward and backward in time. In time, it is applied by inferring the soil water retention curve of one time from that of another time. In space, it can be applied by inferring the soil water retention curve of one location from that of another location. Forward and backward in time by inferring the soil water retention curve of, forward and backward in time is actually by switching places of inference and and reference. So in the next slide, we are going to see the results of some of the evaluation of the model. So here I am presenting the result from the evaluation of the model on soils of different tillage management and in soils of different textures. This were done forward and backward in time by switching places of post-harvest or inference and by switching places of inference and reference between post-harvest and post-tillage. So you can see that the fits were great. We had the coefficient of determination being 98% and above, and we had low root mean square errors. So for details of this model, the calibration, and for more on the evaluation, you can refer to Utin et al. 2026. Results from a recent work involving slurry and compost-treated soils suggest better fits with this model when inference time point is closer to the reference time points. This work is under review. So, for example, we used one reference time point at the post tillage of 2022 to infer the soil water retention curve at the post-harvest of 2022, post-tillage of 2023, and post-harvest of 2023. Basically, we used one reference to infer soil water retention curves across 2 years. So we had very poor fits at the farthest time point, which was the 2023 post-harvest. Then we now went ahead to make the post planting of 2023 a reference. So that improved the fits that we obtained at 2023 post-harvest. So the next step in this work is to test the model across wider conditions and to recalibrate the model where necessary. So I am ready to collaborate with anyone who has data of repeated soil water retention curves measurements. So let us look at some of the implications of this model for researchers and farmers. For researchers, model evaluation and recalibration. We can also compare this method with sensor-based approaches. Irrigation, we can integrate this into environmental and crop models. We can extend the method to other models. We can use it to investigate the structural dynamics and the associated dynamics of soil water retention under changing climates and management options. For farmers, reduce cost and efforts of repeated soil water retention curve determination, better estimation of plants available water throughout the season, more accurate irrigation scheduling, and improved water use efficiency. Can also be used for early detection of structural degradation and the evaluation of long-term soil management practices. Ultimately, it can lead to improved crop productivity and soil resilience under variable weather. In conclusion, dynamic soil structure results in corresponding changes in soil water contents at a given metric potential. Recognizing these dynamics in environmental decision-making and incorporating them into environmental models could improve both management decisions and model predictions. The Utibe Utin framework provides a simple approach for inferring soil water retention curves and complements the traditional methods and sensor-based methods. It enables repeated soil water retention curve estimation within a growing season while reducing the cost, efforts, and the time associated with repeated traditional measurements. My supervisory team, Paul Allet, Joe Smith, Josie Jerez, did a great work supervising my PhD. I appreciate the soil biophysics group and the Environmental Modeling Group of the School of Biological Sciences, University of Aberdeen, for the useful inputs when this model was being developed. The University of Uyo and TED Fund Nigeria are being appreciated for being major funders of my PhD. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Utibe. That was really interesting. So just a reminder to you all, if you've got questions for Utibe, please submit them via the Q&A box. I've seen a few of you putting in the chat that you're interested in the work. So please do put your questions in the chat box. Oh, sorry, the Q&A box. And then we can put them to him at the end of the session. So our second speaker is Vincent van Walt, who will be speaking on precious water irrigation optimization. Vincent has many years' experience in the environmental monitoring field. Over 40 years ago, Van Walt was established to provide quality equipment that provides consistent and accurate results for soil and water research. So with over 40 years' experience, Vincent continues to share his knowledge and expertise on groundwater and soil sampling field techniques, and is often involved in training courses, demonstrations, and bespoke telemetry installs for soil moisture research. So over to you, Vincent.
Thank you, Lizzie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vincent van Walt. They've asked me to give a 5-minute introduction at the beginning, but because I've got some possibly more important things to do, if I have time, I'll go back to this and I'll wade straight into the schedule of what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. So we want to use existing sensors to fine-tune irrigation. So why might we want to do that? So we want to do that to improve the quality and or the yield of crop and the reduction in second grade and wastage. Now, I'm going to be talking about intensive horticulture. So these are generally protected crops and also extensive growing methods, agriculture. This reduction in second grade and wastage is of enormous importance in protected crops. So if you're growing 10 million plants, if you manage to reduce your wastage by even 0.5%, the economic benefits are enormous. And of course, the other reason why we might want to use this is to minimize the water inputs. Before we go into that, where we need to find out, we need to decide where does the irrigation water come from and why does it matter? Well, it can come from rivers, from groundwater reservoirs, mains, and it is important where it comes from because there is a quality difference between the waters, and we'll talk more about that when we look at some examples, particularly in Spain, where there is often a mixture of groundwater, reservoir water, and perhaps water from desalination plants. It also matters because there is a cost associated with where that water is coming from. We also need to establish who pays for irrigation water and why it matters. Well, it matters because there's a risk to cheap water or free water. Cheap water or free water tends to lead farmers and growers to overusage. That is, to use too much water, which is going to lead to leaching of compounds from the soil. And by using a combination of volumetric soil moisture sensors and matrix potential sensors, we can attempt to fine-tune the irrigation. So in elementary terms, and it is something that we explain specifically to growers and farmers. And let me say at this stage that there is a huge difference between what is done in research and the application of that research to practical situations. I tend to explain it as soil moisture sensors tells us how much water is present, and soil matrix potential sensors is how much of that water is actually available to the plant. Now, I want to talk a little bit about soil moisture sensors because there's many, many different types, and we'll relate those in a moment to cost. And because we are now applying that research in a commercial environment, the cost of the sensors and the cost of applying the technology is extremely important for those sectors. So one thing we need to look at is the difference between sensors that measure absolute measurements and those that measure relative. Now, in commercial growing, we are particularly interested in sensors which are relative. By that I mean that it reads consistently. If I add water, the soil moisture content will go up. If the soil dries, it will reduce. Do we actually need absolute sensors? No, we do not, because actually it doesn't matter whether we're measuring 20% soil moisture or we're measuring 25%. It is, to the commercial grower and farmer, this is somewhat irrelevant. I'd also say that the added benefit of most soil moisture sensors is that they provide, through a separate channel, the electrical conductivity of the soil, either as bulk electrical conductivity or pore electrical conductivity. And that is really, really useful when you are particularly in protected crops where you're also measuring the nutrition. The soil moisture sensors are very dependent on the soil matrix, and if you wanted absolute measurements, it means that every single sensor has to be calibrated to that particular soil matrix. And going back to Dr. Utin's presentation a moment ago, he is showing that actually the soil matrix is changing during the growth cycle. So going on to soil matrix potential sensors, so they, in easy terms, they are telling us how much of the water is available. I'm going to talk about two types. The first one is the tensiometer, which I think many of you might be familiar with. And the other one is the tension mark, which is a solid state item which reports the matrix potential. But these sensors are very, very much less dependent on the soil matrix than the soil moisture sensors, and therefore using the combination of the two is really useful. What are volumetric moisture content sensors? I'm giving here three examples. On the left, we have a TDR soil moisture sensor. In the middle, we have a sensor from Delta T. I think it uses frequency domain. On the right, I haven't used the sensor yet. I have no idea what technology it uses, but I just want to draw your attention to the cost of these sensors. On the left, we're talking a sensor around about the £800 mark. The Delta T is around the £250 marks. And the third sensor there, which is a sensor that we will be testing soon, has a market value of £65. And in commercial environments, cost is incredibly important. Also because, and I think let's go back to this first. For those of you who may not know the difference between a tensiometer and something like the tension mark, a solid state tension meter, The tensiometer is a very simple device. It's a tube at the base of which there is a porous ceramic pot. And the tube is filled with water and it's closed off with a cap. And within that cap, there is a pressure gauge. In the case that the soil is completely saturated, there will be no pressure within the tube, so the manometer will read 0. As the soil dries, the tension draws the water from within the tube, and we are recording a value of under pressure within the tube. Tensiometers are very useful because they're cheap and they can be used particularly in outside areas of agriculture. There is a few problems with them. One is that the ceramic is very brittle, which means that if you hit a little bit of flint or a rock, you can break that. And secondly, if the reservoir is empty of the water, the device stops working entirely. The other problem that we have, and particularly for protected crops, which are perhaps grown in small pot sizes, is one of stability. We try to locate the sensor within let us say, a 5-litre pot. And we find that because the device is quite big, we have a stability problem. We don't make a good contact with the surrounding soil, and therefore we're getting wrong measurements. The other thing I would say, and we'll come back to that importance later, is that in general, tensiometers can only record to about 850 hectopascals. Which puts us very close to the field capacity zone on the soil retention curve, which Utibe was talking about earlier. We'll talk about that later. So on the right, we have something called a tensiomark. And the tensiomark is a solid state device, just in very, very rough terms. How it works is that there are two porous ceramic plates, which wet and drain. Sandwiched between them is a sensor. Now, the heat capacity varies depending on the wetting and the draining. And to assist in those measurements, we add a pulse of heat to the system. The more water there is, the more energy we have to put into that pulse of heat. And we measure that energy requirement. So it's really at the base of it, it's a very simple instrument. We're measuring the amount of energy that we need to heat up that water. But in return, we are getting very accurate measurements directly from the sensor. In the end, and I am not sure on my screen, this chart is very, very small. But in the end, what we really want is a system which allows us to visualize both the soil moisture content and the tension in a particular crop. And on this chart, these I took from a system which we have installed at two of the largest protected crops. These are ornamentals in the UK, and you can actually see the relationship between the soil moisture content, which is the dial at the top, excuse me, and the soil tension at the base. So in some cases, let's look at the gauges on the right-hand side. We can see that both the soil moisture is reading very low, 11.8%, and we can see that the soil tension is quite high, indicating that this particular crop is running extremely dry. The little charts below, and again, I'm sorry if it's so small, I can hardly see it on my screen. These are example of a retention curve, and for this particular crop, which is grown actually in a peat-free environment, we do not yet have a curve for it. But I think I may have expanded that. Yeah. So the construction of a PF curve is something that Dr. Utin has been describing in the previous presentation. But there are the two things that we have to be careful of. One is the permanent wilting point. If we go beyond that, the crop dies. It's as simple as that. But it's the field capacity. So the field capacity is the point where the soil matrix or peat-free mixture retains the water against gravity. And in the growing environment, we are very, very interested in this green band, which is the band of field capacity, which lies somewhere between 1.8 and 2.5 PF. We tend to use PF, which is the logarithm of the hectopascals. It's difficult to write numbers like 10 million hectopascals, so we just prefer to take the log of that. But in rough terms, we want to be within that zone. And here we come back to Dr. Utin's slide. This is a generic slide for sandy soils, loam, and so forth. We need this curve to determine where we are within that zone. Again, in very, very small letters, I referred earlier to the tensiometers. The tensiometers are coming very, very close to that field capacity zone, and therefore they are less suitable, I think, for the measurement of tension in horticultural or agricultural crops. We also need to just consider a little bit, how does the irrigation water reach the plant? And what is incredibly important from a commercial point of view is that control of the irrigation can only be achieved by an irrigation branch, so per solenoid. So at the watering cycle, the pump is initiated, a solenoid in a particular, which regulates a particular area, opens, and the water is delivered to the plant. Now, perhaps in an extensive agriculture, we may have very few solenoids, and one solenoid might deal with 1 hectare or even 2 hectares. When we're dealing at protected crops, it's much more difficult. I gave you the example earlier of the 2 nurseries in the UK growing ornamentals. On one of those nurseries, they have 354 solenoids, so 354 distinct watering areas. And you can therefore imagine that if you want to place sensors, you would have to place sensors in each of those irrigation areas. And this would make the viability of an irrigation controlled by sensors really expensive and beyond really the finances of most growers. Some examples that I want to dwell on a little bit. Many years ago, possibly 25, 30 years ago, I was in Gran Canaria, and where the water is very, very precious. Now, in that particular location, and they were growing chrysanthemum mother plants to take cuttings, they were using overhead spray lines. Now, one of the things that they discovered is that they were losing about 50% of the water they were applying due to evaporation. So between the spray nozzles and the crop, 50% of the water was lost. in that particular instance, water is not only precious, but actually expensive. It was a big problem. I give a second example of the pasture, so the fields which are irrigated in New Zealand. They use pivots, which are essentially in very, very long irrigation lines, and those irrigation lines can be measured in hundreds and hundreds of meters. I think I saw one which is about 300 meters long. They take the water from the river and they spray the fields with that water. And both from the experience on the Canary Islands and New Zealand, there are some practical advice which became evident fairly early on, and that is to use a pre-water cycle. So the pre-water cycles is where the cycle that gets the capillary going, you wait and then you irrigate for the main cycle. And it was found that if you added up the pre-water cycle and the main cycle, you needed to apply less water than if you applied just one water cycle to the whole crop. So it's a little possibly an advice to reduce the water input is use, if you can, two water cycles, a pre-water cycle and a main water cycles. And in the case of the Canary Islands, don't water during the day. So the watering was done at night where feasible. So we go on to a couple of examples that I have. And the first one is from a place called Vierfontein. It's in right at the tip of South Africa. It's an 80-hectare farm, and they only produce blueberries. And the chances are, at least if you are in the UK and if you like blueberries, that the blueberries you eat actually come from this farm. The site is important because the plants, the blueberry plants, and there's a very small picture here, they're not very pretty, but in this particular farm, they are grown on virgin sand. So it's almost it has almost no organic matter within it. And they're looking to monitor the water input, which on this particular farm is actually free water. And they regulate their irrigation according to the soil moisture sensors. And here we can see clearly each irrigation cycle. So we are dropping here, the irrigation was triggered at this point. Soil moisture goes up, it goes back down again. And then we irrigate a little bit, and then we see this little hop. Now, that's not an irrigation cycle. Sorry, I went too far. That's not an irrigation cycle. This is rainwater. So it rained during that period. Again, we trigger an irrigation point, soil moisture goes up. And on this particular graph, what we can see is that insufficient water was being applied, so there was not sufficient reservoir of water to sustain the crops. These red lines are the window within which that soil moisture should be for a perfect crop. The graph below is showing, again, the two red lines are showing the parameters for electrical conductivity, which is being measured at the same time by the same sensor. And we're aiming to have the conductivity within those two lines. And here we have a perfect representation of how we can trigger irrigation, trigger the feed, in this particular case, liquid feed, to achieve a very, very stable nutritional regime for those blueberries. The second example I want to measure is in Spain, southern Spain, a place called Almeria. And Almeria's greenhouses cover more than 40,000 hectares of area, making it one of the largest concentrations of greenhouses in the world. The greenhouses you can see are all plastic, and the crops are grown within that. The water is mostly taken from an aquifer. In some areas, they'll be using water from desalination plants. But the importance of this is that if you overwater, you have to be very careful about the leaching of nutrients which go back down into the aquifer. The long and the short of it is that this aquifer can supply enough water, or the aquifers, I should say, can supply sufficient water for this area, but the quality of the water is being adversely affected by the intensity of the cropping. But the reason I want to talk specifically about Almeria is that whereas in these greenhouses that you see here, more historically, they would be growing peppers, tomatoes, that sort of vegetable, they're finding it more profitable now to move to fruit like avocados. Now, the consequence of that is that the water usage is much higher because avocados require an awful lot of water. I think it's about 100 liters per plant per day, so it's an enormous quantity of water. Monitoring both the quality of the water within the aquifer, but also monitoring the moisture content and soil nature potential of the crops being grown are really, really important to minimize the usage of the water. We do have some challenges of achieving a reduction in the environmental impact of irrigation. The one is the cost of the sensor. So if we're going to entice farmers and growers to use these sensors, we've got to look at technology which is affordable by those commercial organizations. The other thing is infrastructure. You need to have the correct pumps. You need to have the access to irrigation computers and that sort of technology. The other thing which is complex or can make it more complex is the sometimes incoherent government guidelines. And I'm going back to the example of Spain, where under the European water framework directives, they put an obligation on Spanish growers and farmers to pay for the water. It is not always clear how that calculation is made, and there are different types of calculations. They are done by tariffs, which cover the cost of transporting the water to the place, the cost perhaps of the desalination plants, so I use that example in Spain because in the UK we have less irrigation, specifically of outdoor crops, less irrigation than we might have in the UK. But those three things do produce a challenge, and I want to talk. I think, am I running out of time? Yeah, just about. About the UK, and I know it's the British Soil Society, Soil Science Society, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the example of peat-free. In 2022, there was a consultation by the government to force users to use peat-free mixes, so mixes with coir and perhaps bark, for growing ornamental plants in, and that consultation remained a consultation, and yet all the large growers are now going to the peat-free solution, and that is actually driven by the supermarkets, the multiples, which are insisting that the plants that they sell have been produced in a peat-free mix. But from that point of view, you can see that in 2024, just over 57% of the respondents to that consultation wanted the law to be replaced by 2024. Well, that is not happening, and that has not happened, and is not happening anytime soon, because the legislation has not been put in place to deal with that. Just quickly on the planned activities that we have at Van Walt for the remainder of 26 and 27. We want to collate answers to some generic questions regarding irrigation, water usage in our zones, which are the UK, Spain, South Africa, and New Zealand. So to answer the questions more definitely, where does irrigation water come from? Who pays for the water? Where there is a cost, how high is it? How the laws relate to irrigation water usage, and are growers and farmers using technology to regulate irrigation? And in the case of protected crops, we already know ornamentals, vegetables, that sensors certainly are being used, but less so in extensive crops like olives, vines, fruit trees, and so forth. I think, Lizzie, I've probably overstayed my time, so I'm going to stop now.
That's great. Thank you very much, Vincent. That was really interesting. So we've now come to the question and answer section of the webinar. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through. This is just a reminder to everyone that if you do have any questions, please can you pop them in the Q&A box that you should be able to see at the top of your screen. So Utibe, I'll start with you. There's a couple of questions that have come through for you. So first one I've got here, someone's saying that they'd like to hear more on simple and practical field methods of determining soil structure, sort of with a particular view to helping share knowledge with soil surveyors. I don't know if is that something that you could comment on, about simple measures to assess soil structure?
Okay, that's a good question. Simple method to assess soil structure. It is not that simple to assess soil structure because of the different processes that combine to form soil structure. Yeah, so there are a lot of processes. It could be climate, it could be root growth, it could be so many things that form soil structure. So and that is why soil structure has been assumed to be, which I said is a necessary assumption, assumed to be static, because yeah, you can just manage what you can. If you cannot study it completely, you can just make do with what you can. So soil structure is very complex. So well, in our own framework, the modeling framework, we try to see how to just use very simple parameters to infer the soil water retention curve. And mind you, soil water retention curve can also be used as a yardstick to assess soil structure. So and that was the aim of that model, to see how to use a very simple way to try to assess soil structure through soil water retention curve.
Okay, thank you for that. Before we go on to the next question, I'm just going to flag to both our speakers, Vincent and Utibe, there's been a few comments in the chat box, which a couple of them are longer comments rather than questions, so I won't read them out. But while I'm not asking you a question, you might want to have a look at those and sort of respond in the chat. If you've got anything to add there, that would be great. Thank you.
Noted.
So Utibe, one more question for you. We've got someone that's asked about the soil water retention curves and said that you mentioned a reanalysis on the soil water retention curves, and just asked whether you could better detail these measurements.
Reanalysis?
Did you mention a reanalysis of the soil water retention curves?
Okay, is it recalibration?
Yes, that might be
think
it.
so. I think so. So yeah, why I mentioned the recalibration is that you may want to apply the model in a different environment and an environment different from the conditions under they were calibrated. So when that happens, there may be the need to recalibrate. If evaluation does not work out, there could be a need to recalibrate to suit the new condition. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Vincent, a couple of questions for you. So firstly, about the distribution of your sensors, are you able to comment on sort of whether there's particular parts of the world or particular crops where that sort of that you're supplying more of your sensors to?
We're supplying them in many of our regions, including the UK, and in the UK in particular, in collaboration with the Royal Horticultural Society. We use them in South Africa, we use them in New Zealand. If the question is how many sensors do we need per growing area, that is a little bit more complex. But in general terms, we are looking at a minimum of two sensors per irrigation area, with each installation having both soil moisture and tension. And we have found that we have, with the minimum of two systems per irrigation area, we find that it correlates quite well, and we're able to make decisions based on just that small quantity of sensors.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. One more final question for you. I wondered whether, with a view to the future, in particular in terms of the impact of climatic extremes that we're getting at the moment, do you as a company have a view in terms of how this might impact the demand for soil water sensors and you and as a business?
Well, water is precious and is going to get more precious. So we need to use the technology that is available. I think that there will be a move to not make this mandatory, but to make sure that growers and farmers are using technology so that they do not overwater. In fact, in the United Kingdom, the ambition is to be able to trigger irrigation directly from the sensors. Now, we're not quite there yet. Well, the technology is there to trigger the pumps and so forth, but we don't have yet the confidence of leaving sensors to regulate the irrigation. But that is not very far away, and I think that is what it's going to be.
Okay, thank you. So thank you both for your contributions. We are now at 1 o'clock, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. It was very topical. I know we've been joined from people around the world. In the UK at the moment, we are in an exceptionally hot and dry period. So I think it was a very topical webinar for today. So on behalf of the British Society of Soil Science, I'd like to express our thanks to Vincent van Walt and Utibe Utin for presenting today. And also thank you to all of you for attending. I think you'll find a quick feedback survey that we'll put in the chat and also in the follow-up email, which we'll hope you'll take the time to complete. The recording of the webinar will also be available after the event on our website and YouTube channel. And also just to let you know that our next webinar is scheduled for the 27th of August, and further details will be on the website and in the follow-up email. Also to flag that check out for some of our early careers researchers, make sure you look at our upcoming Unearth Your Potential workshops on journal peer review and also stakeholder communication and engagement. And the final notice from me is that we've also got our annual conference on the 2nd and 4th December in Aberdeen. So abstract submission for oral presentations is now open until the end of August, and more details are on our website. So I hope to see you at future events, and in the meantime, thank you all again and goodbye.